For 200 years, the galactic archives listed humanity under one word: extinct. A cautionary tale told to younglings, a species that supposedly wiped itself out in some ancient war nobody could even name anymore. A myth, a ghost story. Then, on a quiet border colony, the sky turned black at noon, and every sensor on the planet screamed the exact same impossible word: incoming. Colony World Renaissar had never seen anything but blue skies and quiet trade routes. Founded by the Valkyrie Compact 2 centuries ago, it sat on the far edge of known space, a peaceful farming world that nobody bothered fighting over. Kid Elder Van Tessick had grown up hearing stories about humans the way most kids hear ghost stories of Euros, something to scare younglings into behaving. Finish your studies, or the humans will come get you, his grandmother used to joke, laughing at her own tale like everybody did, because humans were extinct. Everybody knew that. Died out in some brutal internal war centuries ago, according to the compact archives of Euros, a species too violent to survive its own success. Wiped out before it ever left its home system for good. The galaxy had moved on, other species filling the gaps, building empires, writing their own histories. Van was 26 now, working colony administration, checking sensor logs on a boring Tuesday shift that felt no different from any other. Until the sky went dark, not cloudy dark, not storm dark. Wrong dark, the kind that made every instinct in his body scream that something was fundamentally broken about the world he was standing on. Sensor room. Report, Van said into his comm, hands already shaking. Sir, we're reading thousands of contacts. Orbital entry vectors. It's not weather, sir. It's ships. Whose ships? Valkyrie reinforcements? A long pause on the other end. Sir, the IFF signature isn't matching anything in our database. It's flagging as an extinct classification code. Van felt his stomach drop. That's not possible. Run it again. I've run it 4 times, sir. The system keeps returning the same result. Human. Word spread through the colony faster than any official channel could manage. Panic. Disbelief. Old grandmothers who'd told bedtime stories about extinct monsters suddenly staring up at a sky full of them, very much alive. Van stood outside the administration building, watching the black mass of ships blot out the sun overhead, and understood in that moment that everything the compact archives had taught him was either a lie or, something far worse, a mistake. Because whatever had actually happened to humanity 200 years ago, extinction clearly wasn't it. The Compact's Emergency Council convened within the hour, feeds patched in from 6 systems, all of them staring at the same impossible sensor data. Grand Counselor Threya Wolm, who'd spent her entire 40-year career studying pre-compact history, felt her hands go cold reading the reports. This isn't possible, she said. The extinction record is confirmed. Cross-referenced across a dozen independent archives. Confirmed by whom? Asked a younger counselor, voice tight with barely controlled panic. Who actually confirmed it, counselor? Because right now there are 11,000 ships sitting over Renaissar with a species designation that's supposed to not exist. Threya didn't have an answer, because the truth, buried deep in records, nobody had bothered digging up in 2 centuries, was uglier than anyone wanted to admit. Humanity hadn't gone extinct. They'd gone quiet. 200 years ago, a coalition of frightened neighboring empires of Euros, afraid of humanity's explosive growth after first contact of Euros, had orchestrated a devastating false flag war meant to cripple humanity before it became a threat. The Compact's ancestors had helped fund it, quietly, then buried their involvement so deep that even their own descendants believed the resulting extinction story. Humanity hadn't died in that war, they'd retreated, sealed their borders, went dark on every channel, every trade route, every diplomatic contact of Euros, and spent 2 centuries rebuilding in silence while the rest of the galaxy moved on, telling ghost stories about a species they'd tried to erase, down on Renaissar. Van Tessick watched the first human shuttle break atmosphere and descend toward the colony's central square. No weapons fire, no destruction Euro, just a slow, deliberate landing that felt heavier with meaning than any invasion could have. The shuttle doors opened. A single figure stepped out, a woman in a simple gray uniform, no rank insignia, walking forward without hesitation while a dozen colony guards stood frozen, unsure whether to raise their weapons or run. My name is Commander Alice Farrow, she said, voice calm, carrying easily across the silent square. 200 years ago, your ancestors helped bury a war that was supposed to erase my species. We didn't die, we remembered. She stopped a few feet from Van, studying the shock on his face. We're not here for revenge, she said. We're here for the truth. and you're going to help us find it." The compact scrambled every diplomatic channel it had, trying to negotiate, trying to explain, trying to bury 2 centuries of buried guilt under fresh promises. None of it worked, because humanity hadn't come back to negotiate. They'd come back with proof. Commander Pharaoh's fleet broadcast the recovered archives across every compact channel simultaneously a euros. Original war logs, financial records, communications between the founding empires detailing exactly how the extinction of humanity had been engineered, funded, and covered up. 200 years of carefully maintained lies unraveling in a single afternoon. "They knew," Van said quietly, reading through translated fragments alongside Pharaoh in the colony's admin building, his grandmother's old bedtime stories replaying in his head with a sick new context. "The whole compact knew, and they let us grow up thinking you were monsters." "Convenient story," Pharaoh said, not unkindly. "Easier to fear a ghost than admit you helped create one." Across the galaxy, empires that had built 2 centuries of comfortable history on humanity's supposed extinction now faced an uncomfortable question. What do you do when the ghost story walks back through the front door with the receipts? Some empires panicked, scrambling defense fleets, half convinced retaliation was coming. It wasn't. Humanity hadn't spent 2 centuries in isolation plotting revenge. They'd spent it building a Euro's technology, culture, a civilization that had grown stronger specifically because it had been forced to survive without any outside help at all. When Commander Pharaoh's fleet finally addressed the full compact assembly through an emergency broadcast, her message wasn't a declaration of war, it was a simple demand. "We're not here to punish anyone for what their ancestors did," she said, her voice steady across 1,000 worlds now watching in stunned silence. "We're here to make sure nobody else's ancestors ever get the chance to do it again. Humanity is done being anybody's secret. We're done being a story you tell to scare children. Recognize us, or don't. Either way, we're not going anywhere quiet ever again." On Renaissar, Van Tessick stood beside Commander Pharaoh as the broadcast ended, watching the black mass of human ships still holding steady in the sky above the colony Euro, not attacking, not retreating, just present. Undeniable. "What happens now?" Van asked. Pharaoh allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Now the galaxy finds out what happens when you spend 200 years underestimating a species that never actually forgot." 3 months after Renaissar, the compact assembly did something it hadn't done in its entire 200-year history. It issued a formal, unanimous apology, broadcast across every channel in compact space, acknowledging the truth behind humanity's disappearance and inviting Earth to establish full diplomatic relations as an equal power. Commander Alice Pharaoh stood before the assembly to accept it, flanked by a small honor guard, no theatrics, no grand speeches about vengeance. Just quiet. Unshakable confidence from a species that had spent 2 centuries as proving it didn't need anyone's permission to survive. "You spent 200 years telling stories about a myth," she said to the packed chamber. "Turns out the myth was just a species that got tired of being lied about and decided silence was safer than trusting people who'd already shown exactly what they were capable of." Grand Counselor Threya Wolm, who'd led the investigation into her own ancestors' crimes, stood to respond, her voice heavy with the weight of 2 centuries of buried guilt. "We failed you," she said simply. "There's no version of history that makes that acceptable. All we can offer now is the truth, and a seat at this table, if you'll still have us." Pharaoh considered the offer for a long moment, the whole chamber holding its breath. "Earth doesn't forget," she finally said. "But we don't hold grudges against grandchildren for their grandparents' crimes, either. We'll take that seat, and we'll be watching, real close, to make sure 200 years of silence never has to happen again." Back on Renaissar, Van Tessick stood in the same square where it all began, watching human engineers and colony workers rebuild trade relations side by side for the first time in 2 centuries. The sky above was clear and blue again. No black mass of ships, no fear Euro, just the quiet, steady presence of a species that had finally stopped hiding. His grandmother's old joke echoed in his head, the one about humans coming to get misbehaving kids. And for the first time, he found himself smiling at it instead of shivering. "Guess the ghost story got a happy ending after all," he murmured. Across the galaxy, in every system that had once told bedtime stories about humanity's extinction, a new story was already spreading a Euros. Not about a myth that died, but about a species that came back louder, stronger, and impossible to ignore ever again.